North and South. What is this? Manchester versus London? North and South is a computer game based on the Belgium comic series. I always thought it was a French comic series, but they're Belgium, called Les Tuniques Bleues. And I apologise for any pronunciation problems there. And it basically is based during the American Civil War. And the game itself, you can either play as the North or the South in the Civil War. The game started live on the Atari ST, but I'm starting off in the Amstrad CPC version because, again, as usual, this is the version I had. I bought it in the Bournemouth Amstrad Centre during the summer of 1991 on disc, thankfully, which meant I avoided the multi-load. The game starts off with this screen with a cavalry man throwing a trumpet in the air and playing a song. You select your language, and you will get the national anthem of the relevant country playing when you select it. It's all very polished, and as you can see, we're over to the ST, and it's very close to the Amstrad version. You get a few more languages on the 16-bit versions here. On the Amstrad version, you only get the French, Spanish, and English. On the ST version, you get Italian and German as well, which is slightly odd because the CPC sold relatively well in Germany. Perhaps they did a customised version for that country. As I said, you get the national anthem play when you select your language, and you get these lovely cartoons as featured in the game. Over to the PC version, running on my Sharp 386 PC, and it's EGA only on the version I've got, so there might be a VGA version, but not one that I could see on the file I've got working here. PC beeper, of course. Of course, you can't take any indication of the speed because it runs at whatever speed your PC runs at. Over to the C64. C64 and Speccy versions are converted by Probe. The Amstrad version was done in France by Infogrames themselves, because the CPC was a massive seller in France. Over the Speccy, nice Infogrames logos there. The Speccy colours seem to manage to work quite well with it. And a very simplified screen here. And French and Spanish options. Well, not many Speccies in France. I don't know why they put a French language version on the Speccy. Amstrad tried and failed to market the +2 and +3 in France. Don't know if they sold particularly many. And this is the menu on the Speccy version. You select what side you want to be on, what year you want to start. If you want interventions from Native Americans, the weather, and Mexicans as well. And just look at the CPC, which should have the more standard. There you go. This is the standard menu from all the other versions. The Speccy is a little bit different. And if you click on the man's bottom there, he should make a noise. Can't resist doing that. So again, turns on interventions from Native Americans and other things. And again, here on the C64, similar kind of screen. Although the character on the right there looks a bit like the park ranger from Yogi Bear. PC version, you can define your keyboard controls on the menu screen as well here. But all these versions are the same. And you can select your level of difficulty as well. You can select which side you want to be on and the level of difficulty. There are 3 levels of difficulty. And just click on the character that opposes you to go from basically a corporal through to a kind of high-ranking army officer. And as you can see there, I've selected a level 2 opponent there, or here on the ST. And you can also select if you get reinforcements as well. You can also even turn off the action sequences and just play it as a strategy game. But I don't know why you'd want to do that. So here we are on the ST, and this is the screen you're confronted with. You've got, if you start in 1861, 2 regiments up the top there, 2 units, which you can move between states, and the enemy, the computer, the Confederates down the bottom, starts off with 2 as well. Train lines run between the cities. If you capture the cities that join each other on the train line, you can transfer gold between the cities, and get enough gold and you can buy more troops. So really the way to win the game is to capture as many of the cities as possible. They have the train lines between them. On the PC I've got weather enabled, so if we go underneath that weather cloud, we won't be able to move a turn. And the cloud moves each time. And if you're playing as the North, you really want to get hold of North Carolina, because twice a year you get troop reinforcements sent from Great Britain. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. Here on the Amiga. Slightly crushed up screen, because it's an ST port. Game originated on the ST and was quickly ported to the Amiga and the Amstrad the following year, and then the C64 and Spectrum versions in 91. Although I think I'm right in saying the CPC version only reached the UK in 1991 when the Spectrum and C64 versions were released in this country. There you go, I've captured that city up there. Don't know which one it is because my geography is appalling. Over the C64 version, the map's not quite as good on here, not particularly clear. However, it's all there. And you can see on the left there's Native American standing there, and also Mexican down the bottom left-hand side. And if you've got troops in that state, there's a risk those people can launch an attack on you. On the Specky version, nice clean map. And there we go, see some gold going into the south, some reserves being transferred between the cities. North Carolina taken by me. It's hard to see the difference between the north and south on the Specky version, because of course there's no colours. Back on the ST, and there we go, we're going in for the attack, because I want South Carolina. We're going to go into battle. I'm going to be on the left, and the computer on the right. You have infantry up the top there. You have, or cavalry rather, down the bottom, and you've got a gun as well. You can only control one lot of people at once, so you've got to make a decision how you're going to attack the enemy. I'm just trying to work out here what the best thing to do. The infantry are quite good, although the range is short. The cannon's got a good long range, and the cavalry are deadly, but if you use them, you expose yourself to getting everything else hit if you're not careful. I've got 2 troops left there. The guns only have, I think I'm right in saying, 8 cannonballs before they have to retreat. So the idea is to avoid being hit. I've got 1 man left. I've got the gun, and then they've killed the man on the gun. But it's me versus 1 man on horseback. Can I do this? He's charging me. Trying to shoot him. Yeah, I did it. And that's generally why I always think the infantry's handy to have. 2 bags of gold for having 2 cities. I ideally want to move that left-hand unit down south and get that next city down. So here's a battle on the Amiga. I'm using... trying to get victory there. And on the Spectrum, things are very monochromatic. Game loses a lot when you lose colours. North and South, the game actually uses colours to distinguish between the sides. So I'm not sure the battle scenes on the Specky work particularly well. This is the PC version. We're over in one of the western states. More kind of desert. And you can blow up the bridge as well. If my little gunman hadn't been shot. But I'm going to try and blow up the bridge here by using my big gun. Ideally, when all the enemy are... Oh! Didn't quite manage it there. That's how you do it. There's still a crossing, by the way, up the top. You can see some kind of crossing area at the top. But getting across a bridge or a crossing is always really dangerous because you're all lined up in one place. I'm finding the AI on the C64 version a little bit irritating. The troops seem to quite happily wander into the river very easily if you leave them alone. Also, for a computer with sprites, the animation is particularly appalling on the C64 version on the battle scenes. Back to the ST now. When we capture a garrison town like this, we have to either run along and capture the flag at the end, or alternatively, if it's your garrison town being captured, you run in from the right hand side and you've got so many attempts to stop the enemy. And you can see the top right hand side there, or bottom right hand side here on the Amstrad, will go down every time a man runs off the screen. And you're represented by the little foot down the bottom, and you have to get past the alarm clock. Lovely scrolling on the fort capturing on the C64. Really like this on the 64. Great contrast from the battle scenes, which don't really work. Lovely scrolling. Detailed high-res main sprite. Okay, a little bit lacking in colour, but it works really well. And you can't avoid those little boxes with explosives in them. And there we go, I've got to the end there. I think it's some jolly music on the C64 as well. And yes, on the C64, even on disc, there's slightly interminable loading between scenes. If you play this on 8-bit, you do need to play this on disc. Tape is just a multi-load nightmare. A short game will turn into something very, very long indeed. On the Speccy version, and it lacks the character of the CPC version, but it works. Unusual situation where the CPC version is the original Z80 code, and the Spectrum is the port. And whether Probe had access to that original code, I don't know. On the PC here, capturing the fort, this 386 is probably a little bit too fast for this. Back on the Amiga, the war is going well for the North. And I've just managed to get enough gold to put in another set of troops. So the South only have one set of troops left. And because I've captured a state with a railway line on it between two towns, I can now try and capture the gold train. This is a fairly rare occurrence in the game. I have to run alongside and jump on the train and do the same as I had to do on the fort, but it's actually much harder. Because if you fall off and every time you get hit, that's it. Oh, I've fallen off and I'm not... Am I going to be able to get back on? I'll get back on. Oh, no. Come on, come on, come on. Oh! Sad noise and then a tantrum. Those are quite hard in all the versions. It's April 1861 on the PC version, and here comes some reinforcements, as I mentioned earlier, and the same on the CPC. If you've got South Carolina, you get troop reinforcements, providing you've got them turned on. On the most basic settings, the game's fairly easy, but you can ramp up that difficulty. You can play as the South. You can play as the South when you're losing the war in 1864 and play against the hardest computer opponents. There's North and South seems like there's perhaps not a lot of gameplay depth in there, but you can play around those settings and play out all these different scenarios which can get progressively harder. So it's only April 61 on the CPC, and yet I'm winning the war. This is the last battle. Alright, try and blow all of his infantry up. Missed them. Get them on the bridge and blow them up. Oh, missed. The most satisfying in the world is hitting the bridge when they're all on there. Right, so now give up on the gun. Kill his infantry. Now we've got a problem, because if I go on that bridge, I'm going to be killed. And you've got to try and group your men together as well. You see, it's really dangerous trying to go over there. What I've got to do now is knock out that cavalry man. And then avoid the cannon until he runs out of cannonballs. And then I've won. Oh! Trouble is, the computer won't fire unless you wait long enough in its eye line. Or its aim, so to speak. So you have to almost play chicken with the gun. Game on the CPC speeds up as well when you've got less characters on the screen, which makes it a little bit harder. Sometimes you end up with two guns facing each other as well, firing at each other. But at the moment, it's just luring him into... Oh, I've lost a man down the hole. How many balls has he got left? Ah, he's run out. Yay, I've won. I have won. And you get lovely graphics at the end of the game. Well done, Captain. You've put an end to this war by defeating the South in 4 months. And you can do that on the easiest setting. You can win the game in 4 months. C64 version, you get some jolly music as well, but you don't get all the text on the screen at once. And I played as the South on the C64 that time. Over on the PC, and I've lost. I've lost to the South. It gets all this lovely animation. Colour's slightly odd because it's EJ, but it still looks really nice. Well, the birds look a little bit more like flies going over the dead body, but never mind, we'll ignore that. Over to the Amiga, and I've won on the Amiga, and here we get a lovely animation. Look at this. Really nice, and here's the ST version. North and South is a remarkable game. It starts out as you thinking it's ostensibly a 16-bit game, but then the 8-bit's got really solid ports of it, especially the Amstrad. It's also deceptive in the fact that, as you see on here, you can defeat the South or North in a few months and have a really quick game. But you can change those settings around. You can play as the South, you can play as the North, you can play against harder opponents. You can turn it around so you're the South at the end of the war when you've got very little resources left against a North that's well resourced, and you can play it that way. And that adds so much more longevity to the game. Of course the 16-bit versions are the lead versions, especially that ST version, which I think, because it doesn't have the crushed up graphics, slightly edges the Amiga version, which has nicer sound. However, I think the real star of the show here is the CPC version. The CPC was still a massive machine in France in the early 90s, and it's got an absolutely solid port of this 16-bit game. Nothing is missing, nothing has been left out, no shortcuts have been made, and it's aimed at the disc user because that's what most CPC owners in France had. Of course, you can play it on tape, but the moment you do that, you're compromised because you've got horrible multi-loads between the battles, between the fort scenes and starting the game up and all the rest of it. Same for the Spectrum and Commodore 64 versions on tape. It's just too fiddly. You've got to be playing this on a disk drive machine or something with modern SD card storage on it. The Spectrum and C64 versions were ported in the UK by Probe. I think they've done a pretty good job on the C64 version, but slightly let down by the battle scenes. C64 can do better than this. Why hasn't it been done better? It's all slightly ugly, you don't have enough colour. It's just a little bit jerky, whereas the CPC version, yes, it's a little bit jerky, but you get all that colour, you can see what's going on, what side is what. Same with the Spectrum version. The battle scenes again, it just... I know on the Spectrum it's a genuine technical limitation, but it just doesn't quite work. When it comes to the fort scenes, and the train chase scenes as well, the C64 version is pretty good though. And if you've got a 64, it's a solid game for your system, although probably not one of the best. On the Specky, yeah, probably go and play something else to be fair. The PC version is a good approximation of the game, but the version I've got is EGA, and it looks a little bit ugly compared to the ST and Amiga versions. Even the CPC version come to that. And I'm only running this on a fairly modest 386 25MHz computer, and it's too fast on that. That's always the perennial PC problem, I suppose. Just use a slower machine. And for once, no compromises have been made for the CPC version. It's coded for the CPC. Okay, it's ported from the ST original version, but they've had to start again on the Z80, and it's on floppy, and there's no compromises to it having to run on a Spectrum or being ported from the Spectrum. No, Infogrames have just gone afterwards. Here, Probe, you sort out some C64 and Spectrum versions after we've sorted out the Amiga, ST, PC and Amstrad versions. So, you know, really good for CPC owners, and I can thoroughly recommend this as a game you check out, especially if you've got a CPC.